John Carter sat in the cold metal chair outside the council chamber, holding his two babies close to his chest. The twin girls were only 3 days old, and they were all he had left in the world. His wife Lisa had died giving birth to them, and now the Colony Council wanted to take them away from him too. The massive colony ship Haven's Rest floated in space above the frozen planet Terra Nova 7. Inside the ship, 5,000 people lived and worked, trying to build a new life among the stars. But life on the ship was hard and the rules were strict. Everyone had to do their job perfectly, or people would die. John worked as an engineer in the ship's power systems. It was dangerous work that required long hours and complete focus. The council said he could not do his job properly while taking care of 2 babies by himself. They wanted him to give the girls to the communal nursery where other people would raise them. John refused. The nursery was not a bad place, but John had promised Lisa before she died that he would never let anyone take their children away. He had watched other parents give up their children to the communal care system, and he saw how those children grew up without knowing their real families. The children were fed and educated, but they belonged to the colony, not to their parents. John Carter, report to the council chamber, a voice said over the speaker system. John stood up slowly, making sure not to wake the sleeping babies. Maya and Luke were so small and fragile. Maya had her mother's dark hair and Luke had John's green eyes. They were perfect and they were his. The council chamber was a large room with 12 seats arranged in a circle. 11 of the 12 council members were present. Chairman Burke sat in the center, looking down at John with cold eyes. Burke was a thin man with gray hair who had been making the hard decisions for the colony for 10 years. John Carter, Burke said, you have been called here because you refuse to follow colony protocol regarding child care responsibilities. I can take care of my children and do my job, John said. I just need a little time to figure it out. Time is something we do not have, Burke replied. Yesterday you were late to your shift because one of the babies was sick. Last week you fell asleep at your station because you were up all night with them. These mistakes put the entire colony at risk. Councilmember Peterson leaned forward. John, we understand this is difficult for you. Losing your wife was tragic. But you must think about what is best for the children and the colony. What is best for my children is staying with their father, John said, his voice getting louder. I will not give them up. Burke's face grew hard. Then you force us to make a difficult choice. The colony's survival depends on every person doing their job without distraction. If you cannot do your job, then you are a danger to all of us. I can do my job, John insisted. Can you? Burke asked. Can you guarantee that you will never be late again? Can you promise that you will never make a mistake because you are tired from caring for babies? Can you swear that you will put the colony's needs before your children's needs when you must choose? John was quiet. He knew he could not make those promises. Taking care of 2 babies by himself was hard, especially when they were so young. They needed to eat every few hours and they cried when they were hungry or uncomfortable, but he also knew he could not give them up. I thought so, Burke said. The council has made its decision. You will surrender the children to communal care, or you will be removed from the colony. Removed? John asked. You mean banished to the planet? Yes, Burke said simply. You and your children will be transported to the surface with basic survival supplies. Perhaps facing the reality of the situation will help you make the right choice. The other council members looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke against Burke's decision. John knew that banishment to Terra Nova 7 was the same as a death sentence. The planet was covered in ice and snow, with temperatures that could kill a person in minutes. No one had ever survived more than a few days on the surface. You cannot do this, John said. The babies are innocent. They have done nothing wrong. They are your responsibility, Burke replied. If you choose to take them with you instead of leaving them in safety, that is your choice. You have 1 hour to decide. John looked around the room at the faces of the council members. Some looked sad, but they all stayed silent. He realized that Burke had already convinced them that this was necessary. They believed that making an example of John would keep other colonists from challenging the rules. There is nothing to decide, John said quietly. I will not abandon my children. Burke nodded. Very well. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. You will be transported to the surface within 2 hours. As John walked out of the council chamber with his babies, he felt like the walls of the ship were closing in around him. Other colonists in the hallways looked away when they saw him. Word had already spread about what was happening. Some people looked sorry for him, but no one dared to speak up or help him. In his small quarters, John packed a bag with clothes and whatever baby supplies he could find. The babies were still sleeping, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. John kissed their foreheads and whispered promises that he would keep them safe somehow. Security guards came to escort him to the shuttle bay. The walk through the ship's corridors felt like a funeral march. John had lived on Haven's Rest for 15 years, ever since he was 18 years old. It was the only home he had ever known as an adult. Now he was leaving it forever. The shuttle that would take them to the planet's surface was small and cold. The pilot would not look at John as he strapped the babies into a makeshift carrier. Through the shuttle's small window, John could see storm clouds gathering around the planet below. The weather reports had been warning about a massive blizzard for days. As the shuttle undocked from Haven's Rest and began its descent toward Terra Nova 7, John held his children close and tried not to think about what would happen next. The ship that had been his home became smaller and smaller above them, until it disappeared into the black of space. Below them, the frozen planet grew larger and more frightening with each passing minute. The shuttle landed hard on a flat area of ice and snow. The pilot opened the cargo door and began unloading John's few supplies without speaking. A basic shelter kit, some food packets, water recyclers, and warm clothes were dumped into the snow. The shelter kit was supposed to protect them from the weather for a few days, but John knew it would not be enough against what was coming. "This is as far as I go," the pilot said finally. "Good luck." The shuttle lifted off immediately, leaving John alone on the frozen surface with his two babies. The wind was already getting stronger and snow was beginning to fall harder. In the distance, John could see the dark clouds of the approaching storm. He had maybe an hour before it hit them with full force. John picked up the babies and as many supplies as he could carry and began looking for the best place to set up the shelter. The empty landscape stretched out in all directions, offering no protection from the wind and cold. As the first real gusts of the storm reached them, John realized that Chairman Burke had been right about one thing. This was indeed a death sentence. The wind hit John like a physical blow, nearly knocking him off his feet. He clutched the babies tighter against his chest, trying to protect them from the stinging snow that was now falling sideways through the air. The storm was moving faster than the weather reports had predicted, and it was much stronger than anyone had expected. John struggled with the shelter kit's components, his fingers already growing numb from the cold. The instruction manual was simple enough, but working with frozen metal pieces while holding two babies was nearly impossible. Every few minutes he had to stop and warm his hands against his body, precious time lost as the storm grew worse around them. The shelter was supposed to be a basic dome structure that could protect a small family for several days. It had heating elements powered by a small battery pack and walls that were designed to keep out wind and moisture. But the pieces were not fitting together properly, and John could not figure out what he was doing wrong. Maya began to cry, her small voice almost lost in the howling wind. The sound cut through John's heart like a knife. He knew she was cold and scared, but he could not stop working on the shelter to comfort her. If he did not get it built soon, they would all freeze to death in the open. Luke joined his sisters crying, and John felt panic rising in his chest. The babies needed warmth and food, but he had nothing to give them except his own body heat. He opened his coat and pressed them against his chest, hoping his body warmth would be enough to keep them alive until he could finish the shelter. The wind was now strong enough to knock John down if he was not careful. Snow was piling up around his feet, and he could barely see more than a few meters in any direction. The storm had turned the world into a white wall of chaos that seemed to want to swallow them alive. After an hour of struggling, John finally managed to get the basic frame of the shelter assembled. But when he tried to attach the wall panels, he discovered that several of the connecting pieces were damaged. The metal had cracked in the cold, making it impossible to create a proper seal against the wind. John did the best he could with what he had, using spare clothing and blankets to fill the gaps where the damaged pieces could not connect properly. The result was not much protection, but it was better than being completely exposed to the storm. He crawled inside with the babies and activated the heating unit. For a few minutes, John felt hope as warm air began to circulate inside the small space. The babies stopped crying and seemed to relax in the relative warmth. John fed them from the bottles he had brought, and they fell asleep in his arms. Maybe they could survive this after all. But the hope did not last long. The heating unit began to make strange noises, clicking and humming in ways that John recognized as signs of malfunction. As an engineer, he knew the sounds of failing equipment, and these were not good sounds. The unit was working too hard to heat the poorly sealed shelter, and the battery pack was draining much faster than it should. John tried to conserve power by turning the heater on and off in short cycles, but it was not enough. The damaged walls of the shelter let in too much cold air, and the heating unit could not keep up. Worse, snow was beginning to pile up around the outside of the shelter, adding weight and pressure that the damaged frame could not handle. 3 hours after the storm had reached full strength, the heating unit gave a final click and stopped working completely. The battery pack was dead and John had no way to recharge it. The temperature inside the shelter began to drop immediately, and he could feel the cold creeping back into their small space like a living thing. John wrapped the babies in every piece of clothing and blanket he had, then held them against his body to share what warmth he could, but he knew it would not be enough. His own body temperature was dropping, and soon he would not be able to keep them warm. The shelter was better than nothing, but without heat it was just a slightly more comfortable place to die. The storm raged on outside, showing no signs of weakening. If anything, it seemed to be getting stronger. The wind howled like an angry beast, and John could hear the shelter's frame creaking under the pressure of the piling snow. He began to worry that the whole structure might collapse on top of them. As the hours passed, John felt his strength leaving him. The cold was like a weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. His hands and feet had lost most of their feeling, and he could barely move his fingers. The babies were still breathing, but they were growing weaker too. Their small bodies could not fight the cold for much longer. John tried to stay awake, knowing that if he fell asleep, he might never wake up. But the cold was making him drowsy, and his thoughts were becoming confused. He began to have strange dreams while still awake, seeing Lisa's face in the swirling snow outside the shelter. She was calling to him, telling him to come with her and leave the pain behind. By the time dawn should have come, John could no longer tell if his eyes were open or closed. Everything was white and cold and silent except for the endless howling of the wind. The babies had stopped moving, and John was no longer sure if they were sleeping or something worse. He held them tighter, as if his grip alone could keep them alive. John thought about Chairman Burke and the council, safe and warm aboard Haven's Rest. They probably thought he was already dead. Maybe they were right. Maybe he had been foolish to think he could survive on this frozen planet with 2 newborn babies. Maybe he should have given them up and let them live in the communal nursery. But even as these thoughts crossed his mind, John rejected them. He had made the right choice, even if it meant they would all die together. The babies belonged with their father, not with strangers who would raise them to be obedient servants of the colony. If they were going to die, at least they would die as a family. The shelter's frame gave a loud crack, and John felt one wall start to buckle inward. Snow was forcing its way through the gaps in the damaged panels, and the whole structure was starting to collapse. Soon they would be completely buried, and even the small protection they had would be gone. John closed his eyes and held his children close, waiting for the end. He whispered their names and told them about their mother, even though he knew they could not hear him. He promised them that they would see Lisa again soon, and that she would take care of them in whatever came after this life. But as John prepared to give up, something caught his attention through the noise of the storm. It was a different sound, mechanical rather than natural. At first he thought he was imagining it, but the sound grew stronger and more distinct. It was the hum of an engine, cutting through the wind like a knife. John forced his eyes open and tried to listen more carefully. Yes, there was definitely something out there. Some kind of vehicle was moving through the storm, and it seemed to be getting closer. John tried to call out, but his voice was too weak to carry over the wind. He fumbled for the emergency beacon in his pack, hoping it still had enough power to send a signal. The beacon's light flashed weakly in the darkness of the shelter, and John pointed it toward the sound of the engine. He pressed the activation button over and over, sending out a distress signal that he prayed someone would see. The sound of the vehicle seemed to change direction, as if it was responding to his signal. John held his breath and listened as the engine noise grew louder and closer. Someone was out there in the storm. Someone who might be able to save them. He did not know who would be crazy enough to travel in weather like this, but he did not care. All that mattered was that help was coming, and maybe his children would live to see another day. The engine noise stopped very close to the shelter, and John heard footsteps crunching through the snow outside. A voice called out, barely audible over the wind, asking if anyone was inside. John tried to answer, but could only manage a weak whisper. He hoped it would be enough. Ayanna Blackhorse pulled her snowcrawler to a stop next to the failing shelter and jumped out into the storm. She had been tracking the weak distress signal for the past 2 hours, following it through the worst blizzard she had seen in 3 years on Terra Nova 7. The signal was so faint that she almost missed it, but her equipment was sensitive enough to pick up even the weakest emergency beacons. She approached the shelter carefully, noting how badly damaged it was. Snow had piled up around it until only the top was visible, and she could see that the frame was buckling under the weight. Whoever was inside would be dead soon if she did not act quickly. "Hello?" she called out over the wind. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help." A weak sound came from inside the shelter, barely human. Ayanna quickly began digging through the snow that had accumulated around the entrance. Her hands moved fast despite the thick gloves she wore, and she used a small shovel from her pack to clear away the worst of the buildup. When she finally got the shelter's entrance clear, Ayanna crawled inside and was shocked by what she found. A man sat huddled in the corner, holding 2 tiny babies against his chest. All 3 of them were blue with cold, and she could see that they were very close to death. The man's eyes were barely open and the babies were not moving at all. "My name is Ayanna," she said, moving closer to examine them. "I'm going to get you out of here." The man tried to speak but could only make weak sounds. Ayanna could see that he was suffering from severe hypothermia, and the babies might already be too far gone, but she had to try to save them. She had emergency medical supplies in her crawler, and her station was only 30 minutes away if she could get them there in time. Ayanna worked quickly to wrap the man and babies in emergency heating blankets from her pack. The blankets used chemical reactions to generate warmth and could help raise their body temperature enough to transport them safely. She also gave the man a shot of stimulant to help keep his heart beating regularly. "I need to move you to my vehicle," she told him. "Can you walk?" The man shook his head weakly. Ayanna realized she would have to carry all 3 of them to the crawler. The babies were small enough that she could manage them together, but the man was too heavy for her to lift alone. She would have to help him walk even though he could barely stand. Ayanna helped the man to his feet and supported most of his weight as they struggled through the snow to her crawler. The vehicle was specially modified for extreme weather travel, with enclosed passenger space and powerful heating systems. She got the man and babies inside and immediately turned the heat up as high as it would go. The crawler was built for 1 person, but Ayanna made room by moving her equipment to the storage compartments. She strapped the man into the passenger seat and placed the babies in a padded box where they would be safe during the rough ride back to her station. The heating blankets were already starting to work, and she could see some color returning to their faces. As they drove through the storm, Ayanna used her radio to check the babies' vital signs with a portable scanner. Their heartbeats were weak but steady and their breathing was shallow but regular. The man was in better condition, though still suffering from severe hypothermia and exhaustion. All 3 of them needed immediate medical care. Ayanna had learned emergency medicine during her training as a tracker and researcher. Part of her job was to survive alone in dangerous conditions, which meant knowing how to treat injuries and illness without outside help. She had equipment at her station that could help stabilize them until they were strong enough to recover naturally. The ride to Ayanna's station took 45 minutes through the storm, longer than usual because of the poor visibility and dangerous driving conditions. The crawler's tracked wheels gripped the ice well, but she had to drive slowly to avoid getting stuck or sliding off course. The storm was showing no signs of letting up, and she knew they would all be trapped at her station until it passed. When they finally reached the entrance to her station, Ayanna was relieved to see that the storm had not damaged any of her equipment. The station was built into a natural cave system, with the entrance hidden behind a rock formation that provided protection from the wind. She drove the crawler directly into the cave entrance where it connected to an airlock system that kept the weather outside. Ayanna's station was much larger than it appeared from outside. The natural caves had been expanded and modified to create a comfortable living space, with all the equipment she needed for long-term survival. Geothermal vents provided unlimited heat and power, and the thick rock walls kept the interior warm and dry no matter how bad the weather got outside. She carried the man and babies into the medical area of her station. where she had equipment for treating everything from broken bones to serious illnesses. The medical bay was small but well equipped, with the examination table, monitoring equipment, and supplies for emergency surgery if needed. Ayana placed the babies in a specialized warming chamber that would gradually raise their body temperature to normal levels. The chamber monitored their vital signs and adjusted the temperature automatically to prevent thermal shock. She then turned her attention to the man, who was more awake now but still very weak. "What's your name?" she asked as she checked his pulse and blood pressure. "John," he whispered. "John Carter. These are my daughters, Maya and Luke." Ayana raised an eyebrow. "Luke is a girl's name?" John managed a weak smile. "Luke is a boy. Maya is the girl, twins." "I see," Ayana said. "What happened to you? How did you end up out there in the storm?" John's face grew sad, and Ayana could see pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. "Banished from the colony ship. They wanted to take my children away." Ayana nodded. She understood that story better than most people. The colony council doesn't like people who won't follow their rules. "You know about them?" John asked. "I know them very well," Ayana said. "They banished me too 3 years ago. Said my research was a waste of resources that could be better used elsewhere." As Ayana worked to treat John's hypothermia, she told him about her own experience with the colony council. She had been studying Terra Nova 7's ecosystem, trying to understand how life could exist on such a harsh planet. Her research had discovered that the planet was much more complex than the initial surveys suggested, with hidden networks of caves and underground water systems that could support human life. But the colony leadership was only interested in exploiting the planet's mineral resources and establishing a basic settlement. They saw her research as academic foolishness that distracted from the real work of survival. When she refused to abandon her studies and take a job in mining operations, they declared her unfit for colony life and sent her to the surface. "They thought I would die in a few days," Ayana said, "but I had been studying this planet for months. I knew where to find shelter and how to survive in the cold. I built this station and continued my research without their permission." John looked around at the comfortable, well-equipped station.
"How did you build all this?"
"Carefully and slowly," Ayana said. "The caves were already here, carved out by underground rivers millions of years ago. I just had to modify them and install the equipment I needed. The geothermal vents provide all the power I need, and the rock walls keep everything warm." The warming chamber beeped softly, indicating that the baby's body temperature had reached safe levels. Ayana checked their vital signs and was pleased to see that they were both breathing normally, and their hearts were beating strongly. They were sleeping peacefully, recovering from their ordeal in the storm. "They're going to be fine," she told John. "You got them here just in time." John closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "I thought we were all going to die out there." "You almost did," Ayana said. "But you're safe now. All 3 of you." John looked at Ayana with gratitude and curiosity. "Why did you come looking for us? You could have stayed safe here and waited for the storm to pass." Ayana was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away by people who think they know what's best for everyone. And because no one deserves to die alone in a storm, especially not children who never had a chance to live." She helped John move to a more comfortable bed where he could rest while his body finished recovering from the cold. The babies were sleeping soundly in the warming chamber, and their color had returned to normal. All 3 of them would need several days to fully recover, but they were out of immediate danger. As John fell asleep, Ayana sat at her monitoring station and watched the storm raging outside through her camera system. The blizzard was expected to last at least another 2 days, which meant her unexpected guests would be staying for a while. She did not mind the company, but she wondered what would happen when the storm ended and they had to decide what to do next. John woke up 12 hours later feeling warmer than he had since leaving the colony ship. The medical bed was comfortable and he could hear the soft hum of equipment around him. For a moment he forgot where he was until he remembered the storm and the rescue. He sat up quickly, looking around for his children. "They're fine," Ayana said from across the room. She was sitting at a desk, working on some kind of electronic device. "The babies are still sleeping, but their vital signs are completely normal now." John could see Maya and Luke in a clear-sided chamber nearby. They looked peaceful and healthy, breathing regularly and moving slightly in their sleep. The warming chamber had saved their lives, and John felt overwhelming gratitude toward the woman who had rescued them. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know how to repay you for what you've done." Ayanna looked up from her work and smiled. "You don't need to repay me. I'm just glad I found you in time." John got out of bed carefully, testing his strength. His body was sore and tired, but he felt much better than he had in days. Ayanna had given him warm clothes to replace his frozen ones, and he was surprised at how comfortable the station felt compared to the harsh environment outside. "How long have I been sleeping?" he asked. "About 12 hours, Ayanna said. "The storm is still going strong, but it should start to weaken by tomorrow morning. You'll be stuck here for at least another day." John nodded and walked over to look at his children. They were so small and helpless, but they had survived something that should have killed them. He felt proud of their strength and amazed at their will to live. "Can I hold them?" he asked. "Of course," Ayanna said. "They'll probably want to eat soon anyway." Ayanna helped John take the babies out of the warming chamber and showed him how to prepare formula using the station's water purification system. The babies woke up when they smelled food and immediately began crying for their bottles. John fed them while Ayanna prepared breakfast for the adults. As they ate, John looked around the station with growing amazement. It was much larger than he had first realized, with multiple rooms connected by tunnels that had been carved into the rock. The main living area had a kitchen, workspace, and comfortable seating area with a view of the outside through a protected window. "This place is incredible," John said. "How long did it take you to build all this?" 3 years, Ayanna said, "but I'm still expanding it. The cave system goes much deeper than what you can see here. I've been exploring and mapping the tunnels, and I think they connect to a much larger network underground." Ayanna showed John around the station, explaining how each system worked. The geothermal power system used natural hot springs to generate electricity and heat for the entire facility. Water came from underground springs that were filtered and purified automatically. Food was grown in a hydroponic garden that used artificial lighting and carefully controlled nutrients. "You're completely self-sufficient," John said with admiration. "That was the idea," Ayanna said. "I knew the Colony Council would never send help, so I had to create everything I needed to survive on my own." The communication room impressed John the most. Ayanna had built a powerful radio system that could reach orbit and communicate with passing ships. She also had weather monitoring equipment that tracked storms and climate patterns across the entire planet. "Have you been in contact with the colony ship?" John asked. Ayanna's expression darkened. "No, they declared me dead after 6 months and stopped monitoring my signals. As far as they're concerned, I don't exist anymore." John felt anger rising in his chest. The Colony Council had written off Ayanna just like they had written off him and his children. They were so focused on control and conformity that they threw away anyone who didn't fit their narrow vision of what colonists should be. "What about other people?" John asked. "Are there others like us who were banished?" "A few," Ayanna said. "I've been in contact with 3 other groups scattered across the planet. Most people who get sent to the surface die within days, but some manage to find shelter and survive." Ayanna showed John her communication logs, which included regular contact with other exiles. There was a group of miners who had been banished for organizing a workers' union, a family that had been sent away for practicing a religion the council disapproved of, and several individuals who had been declared mentally unfit for colony life. "We help each other when we can," Ayanna said. "Share information about weather patterns, safe areas, and resources. But mostly we're all just trying to survive on our own." John was amazed to learn that there was a whole network of exiles living on Terra Nova 7. The Colony Council probably had no idea that so many people had managed to survive banishment, or they didn't care as long as the exiles stayed away from the main settlement. "What do you do here all day?" John asked. Ayanna's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Research. This planet is amazing, John. The initial surveys barely scratched the surface of what's really here." She pulled up files on her computer showing detailed maps of the underground cave systems, weather patterns, and geological surveys. Her research had revealed that Terra Nova 7 was much more geologically active than anyone had realized, with vast networks of caves and underground rivers that created pockets of warmth, even in the coldest weather. "The planet has natural climate control systems," Ayanna explained. "The geothermal activity creates warm zones underground, and the cave networks distribute that heat across huge areas. People could live here comfortably if they knew where to look." John studied the maps and data with growing excitement. As an engineer, he could see the potential for building larger settlements in the underground areas. With proper planning and construction, thousands of people could live safely on Terra Nova 7 without depending on technology from the colony ship. "Have you shared this information with the colony?" John asked. "I tried," Ayanna said sadly, "but they weren't interested. Chairman Burke said my research was a waste of time because they had already decided to focus on surface mining operations." John shook his head in disgust. The colony leadership was so narrow-minded that they couldn't see the potential of their own planet. They were content to struggle with basic survival while sitting on top of resources that could support a thriving civilization. The babies began crying again, and John realized it was time for another feeding. As he prepared their bottles, he thought about what Ayanna had shown him. For the first time since leaving the colony ship, he began to feel hope about the future. "Ayanna," he said as he fed Maya, "what if we could build something better than what the colony has? What if we could create a real home here?" Ayanna looked at him with interest. "What do you mean?" "I mean a settlement that uses all this knowledge you've gathered. A place where people could live freely without someone like Burke telling them how to raise their children or what research they're allowed to do." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, considering the idea. It would be dangerous. The Colony Council wouldn't like competition, especially from people they've already banished. "They think we're dead anyway," John pointed out. "And you said there are others out there who might want to join us." "It would take years to build something like that," Ayanna said. "And we'd need a lot more people and resources." John looked down at his sleeping children and made a decision. "I have years, and I have skills that could help. My children are going to grow up somewhere, and I'd rather it be in a place where they can be free." Ayanna smiled slowly. "You know, I've been thinking the same thing for a while now. I just never had anyone to help make it happen." She pulled up another set of files on her computer, showing detailed plans for expanding the cave system and building larger living areas. John realized that she had been working on this idea for months, maybe years, just waiting for the right opportunity. "There's a perfect location about 50 kilometers from here," Ayanna said. "A large cave complex near several geothermal vents, with access to fresh water and mineral deposits. It could support hundreds of people if we built it right." John studied the plans with growing excitement. As an engineer, he could see how to expand Ayanna's designs and create something truly impressive. They could build not just a survival shelter, but a real community where people could live and work and raise families in freedom. "When can we start?" he asked. Ayanna laughed. "Let's wait for the storm to end first, and for you to finish recovering. Building a new civilization is going to take some time." Outside, the wind was still howling, but John no longer felt afraid of the storm. He was warm and safe with his children, and for the first time since Lisa's death, he felt like he had a real future to look forward to. The Colony Council had tried to destroy his family, but instead they had given him something he never expected to find: a chance to build a better world. The storm finally ended 3 days later, leaving behind a world covered in fresh snow and ice. John stood at the station's main window, watching sunlight break through the clouds for the first time since his rescue. The landscape looked peaceful and beautiful, nothing like the deadly environment that had nearly killed his family. Ayanna joined him at the window, holding a cup of hot coffee made from supplies she had been carefully rationing. She had shared her food and resources generously with John and the babies, never complaining about the extra burden they represented. "It's beautiful when it's not trying to kill you," John said. Ayanna smiled. "That's true of most things on this planet. The danger comes from not understanding how to work with the environment instead of fighting against it." Over the past 3 days, John had learned more about Terra Nova 7 than he had during his entire time on the colony ship. Ayanna had taught him to read the weather patterns in the clouds, to recognize the signs of geothermal activity underground, and to identify the areas where the planet's natural systems provided protection from the cold. "Your ancestors knew about working with nature instead of fighting it," John said. Ayanna nodded. "Cherokee tradition teaches that humans are part of the natural world, not separate from it. When I came to this planet, I tried to understand it the way my grandmother would have understood a new forest or mountain range." John had been fascinated to learn about Ayanna's background. She was the daughter of a Cherokee woman and a Scottish engineer, raised on stories of both cultures. Her grandmother had taught her traditional tracking and survival skills, while her father had given her a love of technology and scientific research. "That's why your research was so much better than the colony's surveys," John said. "You were looking at the whole system instead of just trying to find things to exploit." "Exactly," Ayanna said. "The colony scientists spent a few months mapping mineral deposits and measuring surface temperatures. They never bothered to understand how the planet actually works. The babies were thriving in the warm, stable environment of the station. Maya and Luke were eating well and sleeping peacefully, showing no signs of their near-death experience in the storm." John was amazed at how quickly they had recovered and how well they seemed to be adapting to their new home. Ayanna had proven to be excellent with children, despite having no experience raising babies. She had helped John learn to care for twins, showing him efficient ways to feed and change them while managing other tasks. Her calm, patient approach made everything easier. "You're a natural teacher," John told her as she helped him give the babies their morning bottles. "I had a good teacher," Ayanna said. "My grandmother raised 7 children while my grandfather was away hunting and trading. She taught me that taking care of people is the most important skill anyone can learn." After breakfast, Ayanna began teaching John the practical skills he would need to survive on Terra Nova 7. She showed him how to recognize edible plants that grew in the warmer cave systems, how to track animals for hunting, and how to find sources of fresh water even in frozen landscapes. John was surprised at how much there was to learn. The colony ship's survival training had focused on using technology and manufactured supplies to stay alive. Ayanna's approach was completely different, based on understanding and working with the planet's natural systems. "The key is learning to see what the planet is telling you," Ayanna explained as they examined animal tracks in the snow outside the station. "Every sign means something. These tracks tell us that there are small mammals living in this area, which means there must be food sources and shelter nearby." John followed Ayanna through the snow, carrying Maya in a specially designed carrier that kept her warm while allowing him to move freely. Luke was safe back at the station, sleeping in the warming chamber. The babies had to take turns going outside until they were old enough to handle the cold better. Ayanna showed John how to identify the subtle signs of geothermal activity underground. Slight differences in snow depth, patches where ice melted faster, and changes in plant growth all indicated areas where natural heat was escaping from below the surface. "The whole planet is alive with energy," Ayanna said. "You just have to know how to see it." They spent the morning exploring the area around the station, and John was amazed at how much life existed in what the colony had written off as a frozen wasteland. There were hardy plants growing in protected areas, small animals that had adapted to the cold, and signs of a complex ecosystem that had been completely missed by the initial surveys. "Why didn't the colony scientists find any of this?" John asked. "Because they weren't looking for it," Ayanna said. "They came here expecting to find a dead planet that they could strip for resources. When you expect to find nothing, that's usually what you find." In the afternoon, Ayanna began teaching John about the technical systems that kept her station running. The geothermal power system was more sophisticated than anything on the colony ship, using multiple heat sources to generate electricity and provide backup power in case any single system failed. "Redundancy is crucial," Ayanna explained as they checked the power monitoring systems. "On a planet like this, you can't afford to have a single point of failure. Everything has to have a backup, and the backup needs a backup." John was impressed by the elegant design of Ayanna's systems. As an engineer, he could appreciate the careful planning and skilled construction that had gone into building the station. But more than that, he could see how the same principles could be applied to much larger projects. "You could scale this up to support hundreds of people," John said as they examined the water purification system. "That's the idea," Ayanna said, "but it would take a lot of work and a lot of people with the right skills." John spent the rest of the day working with Ayanna to improve some of the station's systems. His engineering background complemented her survival and research skills perfectly. Together, they were able to increase the efficiency of several systems and design improvements that would make the station even more self-sufficient. "We make a good team," Ayanna said as they finished upgrading the communication array. "I was thinking the same thing," John said. "What would it take to contact those other exile groups you mentioned?" Ayanna activated the communication system and showed John how to operate the radio equipment. The station could reach anywhere on the planet, and with the right relay systems, it could even communicate with ships in orbit. "Let's see who's out there," Ayanna said. They spent the evening making contact with the other exile groups scattered across Terra Nova 7. John was surprised to learn how many people had managed to survive banishment and build successful settlements in various locations around the planet. The mining group had established a camp near a rich mineral deposit and were doing quite well for themselves. The religious family had found a warm valley where they were growing crops and raising livestock. The individual exiles had each found their own ways to survive, from hunting and trading to scavenging useful materials from colony ship supply drops. "There are at least 30 people out there," John said as they finished the radio contacts. "That's enough to start a real community." "It's enough to start," Ayana agreed. "But we'd need to convince them to work together. Some of these people have been alone for years. They might not want to give up their independence." John understood the challenge. People who had survived banishment and built their own settlements would be naturally suspicious of any plan that required them to trust others. But he also knew that they could accomplish much more working together than they could alone. "What if we could offer them something better than what they have now?" John asked. "A chance to build something permanent and secure where their children could grow up safely." Ayana looked at Maya, who was sleeping peacefully in John's arms. "Children do change everything. They make people think about the future differently." As they prepared for bed, John felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since before Lisa's death. For months he had been focused on just surviving day by day, protecting his children and hoping for a chance at a normal life. Now he was thinking about building something that could last for generations. "Ayana," John said as he put the babies to bed, "I want to ask you something important." "What is it?" she said. "When we start building this new settlement, I want you to lead it. You know this planet better than anyone, and you understand how to work with people. You'd be a much better leader than someone like Chairman Burke." Ayana was quiet for a long moment. "I've never wanted to be a leader, John. I prefer research and exploration." "The best leaders are usually the ones who don't want power," John said. "They're the ones who can be trusted to do what's right instead of what's easy." Ayana smiled. "Let's focus on building the community first. We can worry about leadership later." John nodded, but he was already convinced that Ayana would be the heart of whatever they built together. She had the knowledge, skills, and character to create something truly special on Terra Nova 7. All they needed now was the courage to begin. 2 weeks after the storm ended, John and Ayana made their first major exploration trip together. They traveled 50 kilometers southeast to the cave complex that Ayana had identified as the perfect location for a larger settlement. The babies stayed behind at the station, sleeping peacefully in the automated care system that Ayana had designed for extended absences. The journey took them through landscapes that John had never imagined could exist on Terra Nova 7. They passed through valleys where geothermal activity kept the temperature warm enough for grass and small trees to grow, even in the middle of winter. Hot springs created patches of green vegetation that looked like paradise compared to the frozen wastelands the colony had explored. "The planet has layers," Ayana explained as they drove through a particularly beautiful valley. "The surface layer is harsh and cold, but underneath there's a whole different world." Their destination was a massive cave opening in the side of a mountain, so large that their vehicle could drive directly inside. But as they penetrated deeper into the cave system, John began to realize that this was not just a natural formation. The walls were too smooth, the passages too regular, and the overall design too purposeful to be completely natural. "Ayana," John said as they stopped to examine the walls more closely, "I don't think these caves are natural." Ayana had been thinking the same thing. She ran her hands over the smooth stone walls, noting the precise angles and careful construction. Someone built this place a long time ago. They left their vehicle and continued on foot, following passages that led deeper into the mountain. Emergency lights on their equipment illuminated walls covered with strange markings that looked almost like writing. The air grew warmer as they descended, and John could hear the sound of flowing water in the distance. After an hour of careful exploration, they emerged into a vast underground chamber that took their breath away. The space was enormous, easily large enough to hold a city. The ceiling arched high above them, supported by massive columns that had been carved from the living rock. In the center of the chamber, an underground river flowed through carefully constructed channels. "This is incredible," John whispered. "Who could have built something like this?" Ayana was examining the columns more closely, noting the sophisticated engineering that had gone into their construction. Someone with technology at least as advanced as ours. Maybe more advanced. As they explored the chamber, they discovered that it was not empty. Complex machinery was built into the walls and floor, though it appeared to be dormant. The design was unlike anything John had seen before, but he could recognize power conduits and control systems that suggested the equipment was still functional. "It's like they just left," Ayana said. "Everything is perfectly preserved, just waiting for someone to turn it back on." John approached one of the larger machines, trying to understand its purpose. The design was alien but logical, with clear input and output connections that suggested it was part of a larger system. As he examined the control panel, he noticed that some of the symbols looked familiar. "Ayana, look at this," John called. "Some of these symbols are mathematical, universal constants that any technological civilization would use." Ayana joined him at the control panel, and together they began to decipher the alien writing. Much of it was incomprehensible, but the mathematical symbols provided a key to understanding the basic functions of the machinery. "I think this is an environmental control system," John said after studying the displays for an hour. "Temperature, humidity, air circulation. Someone designed this place to be a perfect living environment." They spent the rest of the day exploring the chamber and mapping its layout. They discovered living areas that had been carved into the walls, with spaces clearly designed for sleeping, cooking, and working. There were areas that might have been laboratories or workshops, and large open spaces that could have served as gathering places for a community. "How many people do you think lived here?" John asked. "Hundreds, maybe thousands," Ayana said. "This place was designed for a large population." As they prepared to camp for the night, John made a decision that would change everything. He approached the main control panel and began to carefully activate some of the systems, using the mathematical symbols as a guide to understand the basic controls. "John, are you sure that's safe?" Ayana asked. "The systems are designed to support life," John said, "and they've been waiting here for who knows how long. I think they want to be used." When John activated the main power system, the entire chamber came to life. Lights appeared along the walls and ceiling, creating a warm, pleasant glow throughout the space. The machinery began to hum quietly, and John could feel air beginning to circulate through carefully designed ventilation systems. "It works," Ayana said in amazement. "After all this time, it still works perfectly." They spent the evening exploring the now illuminated chamber, discovering details that had been hidden in the darkness. The alien builders had created something that was both functional and beautiful, with carved decorations and artistic touches that showed they cared about more than just survival. "They were like us," Ayana said as they examined murals carved into the chamber walls. "They wanted to create a home, not just a shelter." The murals told a story that John and Ayana could partially understand through the mathematical symbols and pictographic elements. The builders had come to Terra Nova 7 from somewhere else, seeking a new home on a planet that offered both challenges and opportunities. They had built their underground city to take advantage of the planet's geothermal energy, while protecting themselves from the harsh surface conditions. "What happened to them?" John asked. The final mural suggested that the builders had eventually left Terra Nova 7, but not because of any disaster or failure. Instead, they seemed to have completed their purpose on the planet and moved on to new challenges elsewhere in the galaxy. "They left this place as a gift," Ayana said, "for whoever came next." As they settled down to sleep in the alien chamber, John felt a sense of destiny that he had never experienced before. The ancient builders had created the perfect foundation for a human settlement, and they had left it waiting for someone with the vision and courage to use it properly. "We have to bring people here," John said. "This place was meant to be a home." "I know," Ayana said, "but we have to be careful about who we trust with this secret. If the wrong people find out about it, they could use it for the wrong purposes." John thought about Chairman Burke and the Colony Council. If they discovered the alien city, they would probably try to claim it for themselves and use it to extend their control over the exiled populations. The city needed to be protected until it could be populated by people who would respect what the builders had created. "We'll tell the other exiles," John said, "the people who have already proven they can survive on their own and work together when they need to." Ayana agreed. "We'll build our community slowly and carefully. We'll only invite people who share our values and understand what we're trying to create." As John fell asleep in the ancient chamber, he dreamed about the future his children would have in this underground paradise. Maya and Luke would grow up in a place where technology and nature worked together in perfect harmony, where no one would try to control their lives or limit their potential. The next morning, John and Ayanna began the process of learning to operate the alien city's systems. Much of the technology was beyond their current understanding, but the basic environmental and power systems were intuitive enough that they could maintain a safe, comfortable living environment. "We're going to need engineers and scientists," John said as they worked with the city's computer systems. "People who can study this technology and learn to use it properly." "I know some people," Ayanna said. "Scientists who were banished for asking too many questions, engineers who were punished for being too creative. They're scattered around the planet, but they might be willing to join us if we can offer them a chance to do real research." John began to see the shape of their future community. It would be built around knowledge and discovery, with people who had been rejected by the colony because they didn't fit narrow definitions of usefulness. They would create a place where curiosity was valued over conformity, where families could raise their children in freedom. "This is going to be bigger than we imagined," John said. "I know," Ayanna replied, smiling, "but that's what makes it exciting." They spent 3 more days in the alien city, learning its systems and planning how to adapt it for human habitation. When they finally returned to Ayanna's station, they brought with them detailed plans for the most ambitious project either of them had ever imagined. The babies were happy to see them return, and John felt a profound sense of peace as he held Maya and Luke in the warm comfort of the station. Soon they would have a real home, a place where they could grow up surrounded by wonders that most humans could never imagine. 3 months after discovering the alien city, John and Ayanna faced their first major test. A distress signal reached their station from a crashed shuttle that had been attempting to reach the colony's main settlement. The shuttle had gone down in a storm 40 kilometers north of their position, and the colony ship's rescue efforts had been unsuccessful. "There are 6 people on that shuttle," Ayanna said as she monitored the emergency beacon. 2 adults and 4 children. The colony has given up looking for them." John felt his anger rising as he listened to the radio traffic from the colony ship. Chairman Burke had declared the shuttle crew dead after only 2 days of searching, claiming that no one could survive that long in the wilderness. The rescue teams had been called back to focus on more pressing colony business. "They're writing them off just like they wrote us off," John said. "The difference is that we're here to help them," Ayanna replied. "But we have a choice to make. If we rescue them, we'll have to decide what to tell them about our settlement plans." John understood the dilemma. So far, they had been careful to keep the alien city secret while slowly building trust with the scattered exile groups. They had made contact with 15 people who were interested in joining their community, but none of them knew the full extent of what they were planning to build. "We save them first," John said. "Then we figure out what to do with them." Ayanna agreed, and they prepared for their most challenging rescue mission yet. The crashed shuttle was in a remote area where the terrain was dangerous and the weather was unpredictable. They would need to travel light and fast, leaving the babies at the station under the care of the automated systems. The journey to the crash site took 8 hours through difficult terrain. When they finally reached the shuttle, they found it buried in snow with significant damage to the hull. The survivors had managed to create a makeshift shelter inside the wreckage, but they were suffering from exposure and running low on supplies. The rescue proved more complicated than expected. 2 of the children were injured and needed immediate medical attention. The adults were weak from hunger and cold, and one of them was showing signs of severe hypothermia. John and Ayanna had to make multiple trips to transport everyone back to safety. During the rescue operation, John learned the identity of the survivors. The adults were Dr. Kate Morrison, a geologist who had been conducting research on the planet's mineral formations, and Paul Chen, a communications specialist who had been maintaining the shuttle's equipment. The children were Dr. Morrison's 2 daughters and Paul's son and daughter. "You're the people who were banished," Dr. Morrison said when she was strong enough to talk. "John Carter and Ayanna Blackhorse. The Colony Council said you were dead." "The Colony Council says a lot of things that aren't true," Ayanna replied as she treated the injured children. As the survivors recovered at the station, John and Ayanna learned their story. Dr. Morrison had been questioning the colony's mineral extraction policies, arguing that they were damaging the planet's ecosystem unnecessarily. Paul Chen had been caught sharing information with exile groups, helping them maintain communication systems. Both had been scheduled for banishment when the shuttle crash occurred. They were sending us to die, Paul said bitterly. The crash just saved them the trouble of a formal execution. John felt a connection with these people that went beyond their shared experience of rejection by the colony. Dr. Morrison's geological expertise could be invaluable for understanding the alien city's construction, and Paul's communication skills would be essential for coordinating with other exile groups. But more importantly, John saw in their eyes the same determination that he felt. They were not broken by their treatment at the hands of the Colony Council. They were angry and ready to fight for something better. After a week of recovery, Dr. Morrison and Paul were strong enough to help with the station's operations. Their children were adapting well to life in the underground facility, and John was amazed at how quickly young people could adjust to new circumstances. "This place is incredible," Dr. Morrison said, as she examined the station's geological surveys. "You've mapped thermal systems that our official surveys completely missed." "That's because the official surveys weren't looking for ways to live with the planet," Ayana explained. "They were only looking for ways to exploit it." John made the decision to trust the newcomers with their plans. He and Ayana spent several days explaining their vision for the alien city and the community they hoped to build there. Dr. Morrison and Paul listened with growing excitement as they realized the scope of what was being proposed. "You're talking about building a real civilization," Dr. Morrison said, "not just another survival settlement." "That's exactly what we're talking about," John said. "A place where people can live freely and pursue knowledge without being controlled by people like Chairman Burke." Paul was particularly interested in the communication aspects of their plans. "If we can establish a proper network between exile groups, we could coordinate resources and support each other much more effectively." The children were fascinated by stories of the alien city and eager to see it for themselves. John was reminded of his own children, who would grow up in this new world where ancient wonders were part of everyday life. But their planning was interrupted by an unexpected development. Paul's monitoring equipment detected a signal from the colony ship that made everyone stop and listen carefully. "They're preparing to abandon the main settlement," Paul said. "The colony ship's life support systems are failing faster than they can be repaired." The implications hit everyone immediately. If the colony ship failed, thousands of people would have to evacuate to the planet's surface. Most of them had no survival skills and no knowledge of how to live in Terra Nova 7's harsh environment. Without help, most of them would die within weeks. "They'll come looking for shelter," Ayana said. "And when they find our settlements, they'll try to take them over." John felt torn between compassion and pragmatism. The colonists were not responsible for the actions of their leaders, but bringing thousands of unprepared people into their carefully planned community could destroy everything they were trying to build. "We can't save everyone," Dr. Morrison said, "but we can't just let them all die either." They spent hours debating their options. They could reveal the alien city and try to accommodate as many refugees as possible, but that would mean giving up control over their community's development. They could stay hidden and let the colonists fend for themselves, but that would mean watching thousands of people die unnecessarily. "There's a third option," Ayana said finally. "We help them, but on our terms." John understood what she was suggesting. Instead of simply opening their doors to refugees, they could use their knowledge and resources to help the colonists establish their own settlements. They could share survival techniques and technological knowledge without revealing their most important secrets. "We become teachers instead of rescuers," John said. "Exactly," Ayana said. "We help them learn to live on this planet properly, instead of just trying to survive on it." Paul nodded enthusiastically. "We could establish training centers where people learn essential skills before they're allowed to settle in sensitive areas," Dr. Morrison added, "and we could guide them toward areas where they won't interfere with our main settlement or damage important ecosystems." As they refined their plans, John felt a sense of responsibility that was both exciting and terrifying. They were no longer just building a community for themselves and a few like-minded exiles. They were potentially becoming the leaders of humanity's future on Terra Nova 7. "Are we ready for this?" John asked as they finalized their strategy. "No," Ayana said honestly. But I don't think anyone ever feels ready for something this big. We just have to do our best and hope we're wise enough to handle the responsibility. John looked at his sleeping children and thought about the world they would inherit. It would not be the simple, safe life he had once imagined for them, but it would be a world where they could grow up free, surrounded by wonders and possibilities that most humans could never dream of. Then we'd better start preparing, John said. We're about to become the future of human civilization on this planet. The next morning, they began sending carefully worded messages to exile groups across Terra Nova 7, preparing them for the challenges and opportunities that were coming. The colony ship's failure would bring crisis, but it would also bring the chance to build something better than what had come before. John held Maya and Luke as he watched Ayana coordinate communications with settlements across the planet. Soon their quiet life of discovery and preparation would become something much larger and more complex, but as he looked at his children's faces, he knew they were ready for whatever came next. 2 years later, John stood in the main chamber of the alien city watching his children take their first steps on the smooth stone floor. Maya and Luke were now healthy toddlers who had never known fear or want. They played among the ancient columns while dozens of other children laughed and ran through the vast underground space that had become humanity's most successful settlement. The city now housed over 300 people from across Terra Nova 7. The exile groups had become the foundation of a thriving community, joined by refugees from the failed colony ship, who had proven themselves willing to learn and contribute. Not everyone had been accepted. Those who tried to recreate the old colonial power structures had been politely directed to other settlements where they could live according to their own values. Ayana had become the community's unofficial leader, though she insisted that important decisions be made by consensus rather than decree. Her combination of practical wisdom and respect for both human and alien knowledge had earned her the trust of even the most independent-minded settlers. The morning council meeting is starting, Dr. Morrison said as she approached John. Kate had become the community's chief researcher, leading teams that were slowly unlocking the secrets of alien technology, while being careful not to damage or misuse what they didn't understand. John picked up his children and walked toward the council chamber, a smaller room adjacent to the main living area where community decisions were made. As one of the city's founding members and chief engineer, he had a voice in all major decisions. But he had learned to value listening more than speaking. The council meetings had evolved into something completely different from the authoritarian structure of the colony ship. Anyone could raise issues or propose solutions, and decisions were made only after thorough discussion and consideration of different viewpoints. It was sometimes slow and messy, but it produced results that everyone could support. "We have a message from the northern settlements," Paul Chen announced as the meeting began. His communication network now connected over 20 different communities across Terra Nova 7, allowing them to share resources and coordinate responses to challenges. The message was from Chairman Burke himself, who had survived the colony ship's failure and established a military-style settlement near the original landing site. Burke's group had been struggling to survive using traditional colonial methods, and they were requesting help with food production and medical supplies. "He's asking for aid from people he tried to murder," said Marcus Webb, one of the miners who had joined the city after being banished for organizing worker protests. "Why should we help him?" Ayana listened to the debate that followed, weighing arguments for and against providing assistance to Burke's settlement. Some community members wanted nothing to do with their former oppressor, while others argued that children in Burke's settlement were innocent of their leader's crimes. "What kind of community do we want to be?" Ayana asked finally. "Are we going to judge people by their leader's actions, or are we going to offer help to anyone who needs it?" John understood the deeper question she was asking. The alien city had given them the power to be either generous or vindictive. Their choice would define not just their own character, but the kind of civilization they were building for their children. "We help them," John said, "but we do it our way. We offer training and resources to anyone who wants to learn, but we don't prop up failed leadership." The council agreed to send a delegation to Burke's settlement, offering to teach sustainable farming techniques and provide medical training. They would not give charity, but they would share knowledge with anyone willing to learn and change. John volunteered to lead the delegation, despite knowing that returning to face Burke would be emotionally difficult. He wanted to see for himself what had become of the colony that had tried to destroy his family The journey to Burke's settlement took 2 days through landscapes that had been transformed by human knowledge and alien technology. The exile communities had learned to work with Terra Nova 7's natural systems, creating a network of thriving settlements connected by safe travel routes and communication links. Burke's settlement was a stark contrast to what John had left behind. The buildings were crude and poorly designed, offering little protection from the planet's harsh weather. The people looked hungry and afraid, struggling to survive using methods that fought against the planet instead of working with it. Chairman Burke met John's delegation at the settlement's entrance, and John was shocked by how much the man had changed. Burke was thinner and grayer, with the look of someone who had been broken by failure and disappointment. "John Carter," Burke said quietly, "I heard you were alive, and that you've built something impressive." "We've built something that works," John replied. "Are you ready to learn why?" Over the following days, John's team taught Burke's people how to use geothermal energy for heating and power, how to grow food in protected underground gardens, and how to work with the planet's weather patterns instead of fighting them. The response was mixed. Many of the younger colonists were eager to learn and change, but some of the older leaders resisted anything that challenged their assumptions. Burke himself was the most resistant to change. He listened to John's explanations with visible discomfort, clearly struggling with the realization that his authoritarian methods had been not just cruel, but counterproductive. "You're asking me to admit that everything I believed was wrong," Burke said during a private conversation with John. "I'm asking you to admit that there are better ways to live," John replied. "Your beliefs about control and hierarchy led to this." He gestured toward the struggling settlement around them. "Our beliefs about cooperation and learning led to prosperity." Burke was quiet for a long time, staring at his failed settlement. "What about the people who followed me? What happens to them if I admit I was wrong?" John felt an unexpected moment of sympathy for the man who had tried to kill his family. Burke was not evil, just limited by fear and narrow thinking. His greatest crime was being unable to imagine better ways of living. "They get a chance to learn and change," John said, "just like everyone else." Some of Burke's people chose to relocate to other settlements where they could learn new skills and start over. Others stayed to try rebuilding their community, using the knowledge John's team had shared. Burke himself eventually stepped down from leadership, becoming just another member of a community trying to find its way. John returned to the alien city with a sense of completion that he had not expected. Facing Burke had not been about revenge or vindication. It had been about proving to himself that the community they had built was strong enough to be generous toward its former enemies. Maya and Luke ran to greet him when he arrived home, chattering excitedly about the new discoveries they had made while exploring the city's deeper levels with other children. They had found chambers that even the adults had not yet explored, filled with alien art and technology that would take years to understand. "They're growing up thinking that wonders are normal," Ayana said as she watched the children play. "They'll never know what it's like to live in fear of people like Burke." John nodded, realizing that this was perhaps their greatest achievement. His children and the other young people in the city were growing up free from the limitations and fears that had shaped the previous generation. They would build on what their parents had started, but they would do it with confidence and optimism that came from knowing no boundaries. "The next generation will go farther than we ever dreamed," John said. As evening fell, the community gathered in the main chamber for their daily meal together. Hundreds of people from dozens of different backgrounds shared food and stories, while children played among the ancient columns. The alien builders could never have imagined that their city would become home to creatures from another star. But John believed they would approve of what had been built there. Dr. Morrison approached with a tablet showing the latest reports from communities across Terra Nova 7. "The network is growing," she said. "We're up to 37 settlements now, all connected and sharing resources." Paul Chen added, "And we've made contact with 2 other planets in nearby systems, human settlements that are interested in learning about our methods." John smiled as he listened to the reports of expanding knowledge and cooperation. What had started as a desperate attempt to save his children from exile had become the foundation for a new kind of human civilization. Not one based on control and fear, but on learning and mutual support. That night, as John put Maya and Luke to bed in their comfortable room carved into the ancient stone, He told them stories about their mother and about the storm that had brought them to this underground paradise. The children listened with the fascination that came from hearing about a world so different from their own. "Will we ever see the colony ship, Papa?" Maya asked. "The ship is gone now," John said gently. "But someday you might visit other worlds where humans live. You'll be able to teach them what we've learned here." Luke, always the more serious of the twins, asked, "Why did the people on the ship try to take us away from you?" John thought carefully about his answer. "They were afraid," he said finally. "They thought that controlling people was the only way to